Okay, so we are in week 4 of a series in which we're talking about the really ugly business of forgiveness. And I say that forgiveness is ugly because as soon as I begin to talk about it, you begin to see a mental image of that person. That person who said those things, who did those things. And with the seeing of that image, you are painfully reminded that that person robbed you of a better past. And it hurts. And because I don't like it when you hurt, I'm going to give you a little bit of respite this morning. I'm nice like that. This morning, I want to talk about the other side of forgiveness. I want to talk about revenge. So this is going to be so much better for everyone. I like the word revenge. It works for me. It even feels good to say it. Revenge, revenge, revenge. It rolls off the tongue in a happy way. The idea of getting the last laugh is attractive to our wounded hearts. And I think if we were open enough and honest enough, we would admit that many of our most visceral fantasies are fantasies in which we get to have our revenge. So this should be fun. So to that end, I'm going to teach you this morning from one of the stranger parts of the Bible, which is really saying something, because the Bible is a strange book. So anyway, in the Old Testament, there's this weird bit called the Book of Judges. It's packed full of bizarre stories, and this particular story is right up there in terms of bizarreness. Chapter 15, the text should be down here or down here. I'm not sure where, but it's there somewhere. Anyway, you got it? Good. So this is basically a day in the life of a man called Samson. Just to give you a quick insight into the kind of man we're talking about, think of your cousin who lives in North Bay. You know that guy, the one with the plaid shirt, scrapes on his knuckles, he plays hockey, he's got a mullet, listens to country music, drives an old Chevy pickup truck, and there's always a half-empty 2-4 in the passenger seat. You know, you got the picture of that guy. Redneck, on testosterone. Cool. Okay, verse 1, Judges 15. The text says, "Later on, at the time of wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife." So the background to this episode is that Samson and his wife had a fight, like you do. They had a falling out, the kind of falling out that ends with doors being slammed, crockery being broken, and Samson going off to his hunting cabin to finish off the rest of his 2-4. Has a good time, sobers up. After a few days, he decides to go home and make up with his wife. Like any sensible, contrite man, he realizes he shouldn't go home empty-handed. So he thinks to himself, should I buy her some chocolates? Should I buy her some flowers? Maybe some jewelry? I'll get her a goat. She'll like a goat. Goats are good. Yeah, you don't read that too often in Cosmo. Anyway, so his wife was so annoyed with him, apparently, that she'd moved back in with her parents. So Samson goes to her family home and says to his father-in-law, "I'm going to my wife's room." Notice the way he says it. "I'm going to my wife's room." The nuance here is sexual. He's fallen out with his wife. He feels bad about it. And now he wants to make up with his wife. And so therefore he doesn't want to talk in the family room. He doesn't want to have a cup of tea in the kitchen. He wants to go to her room with the goat. But we're told that her father would not let him go in. The reason being, next sentence, the father says, "I was so sure you thoroughly hated her that I gave her to your friend." All right. "Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead." Okay, so this clearly is messy. We are deep here into an episode of the Jerry Springer show. He says, "I gave your wife to your friend, but don't worry about it because she was my ugliest daughter anyway. Why don't you just go to her sister's room? She's better looking." Even in Kentucky, this would be weird. Now, this is kind of a subtext, I guess, but the father and his 2 daughters are part of an ethnic group called Philistines. And one of the agendas that the book of Judges had is to demonstrate that the Philistines mistreat women. And Samson, who's a Jew, not a Philistine, regards this behaviour as not only morally reprehensible, but personally hurtful. He liked his wife. He wanted to make up with her. He even shelled out money for a goat. And now these inbred Philistines have taken that from him. And so he says in the next verse, "This time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. This time I will really harm them." This is the classic rationale for revenge. I have a right. You see, I had a right not to have been hurt by you. And seeing as how I was hurt by you, I now have a right to extract revenge from you. So the Bible says he went out and caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails, lit the torches, and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. Crucially, he burned up the shocks and standing grain together with the vineyards and the olive groves. What's going on here? Very simple. In the ancient world, this was an act of warfare. If you had an enemy whose economy was almost 100% agrarian, then one of the smartest things you could do to defeat your enemy was destroy his crops. If he has no crops, he has no food, and he has no money. And if you take away his food and his money, you take away his ability to wage war. And so in antiquity, they quite often used animals to do this kind of sabotage. For example, at the Battle of Lake Trasimene in 217 BC, Hannibal the Great does exactly this to the Romans, only instead of foxes, he uses oxen. So animals sometimes were the ancient equivalent of unmanned drones. So understand then that what Samson does here is war. And you'll notice that this act of war escalates everything. At the start of the story, we have a wife running off with another man, and now early in the story, he just responds by destroying the economy of hundreds of men. Then we're told that when the Philistines asked who did this, they were told, it was Samson. And he did it because his wife was given to his friend. I think that's a legitimate question, by the way. They wake up in the morning and they see the charred remains of a lifetime's worth of work. In the case of the vineyards and olive groves, actually several lifetimes' worth of work. So this is the morning after the stock market crash. This is the morning when they wake up and realize that someone has done something to wrong them, and they want to know who. After making some inquiries, they find out the story about Samson and his weird father-in-law and his ex-wife and sister-in-law and all that. Then we're told that the Philistines went up and burned her and her father to death. Okay. At this point, I want to ask the question, did that feel good? I mean, okay, you felt pretty bad when they burnt your crops, but when you got revenge and burned a girl and her father to death, did that make you feel better? I mean, as you watched them writhing about in the flames, as you smelled their burning flesh, did you find all of that cathartic? Was their pain therapy for you? Did their pain heal yours? Next sentence. Samson said to them, "Since you've acted like this, I won't stop till I get my revenge on you." Notice his psyche. Since you've acted like this, because my destroying your crops was totally rational. But since you've taken it to the next level, now I won't stop till I get my revenge. Let me ask you another question. What would it look like for you? I mean, what would you have to do to the person who wronged you to make everything okay again? At what point would the pain that you caused them take away the pain that they caused you? How and where would you define the end point of revenge? In your fantasies, where does it stop? In the next sentence for Samson, we're told that he attacked them vigorously and slaughtered many of them. In ancient Hebrew, this sentence literally reads, Samson piled leg on thigh. That's what it says, leg on thigh. In other words, he left bodies and body parts everywhere. This was a slasher movie. This is Jason and Freddy. There's bodies and bits of bodies everywhere. Then we're told that he went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Etam, And he went there on his own, and I suppose he reflected on what happened. And I want to know, did he feel better now? I mean, was the sound of breaking bones and squelching blood fresh in his memory therapy for him? Did killing all those people make up for losing his wife? Then we're told, I mean, it's still never ends, does it? We're told the Philistines went up and camped in Judah, spreading out near Lehi. The men of Judah asked, "Have you come to fight us?" They said, "We've come to take Samson prisoner, to do to him as he did to us." Notice how this is going on. You hurt me, I want my own back and hurt you. I want you to feel pain because you made me feel pain. Revenge. Seems so logical. Then we're told that 3,000 men, like pause on that beauty. 3,000 men, it says in verse 11. In verse 1, we started out with one guy and his wife and some argument and a goat. Now there's 3,000 men involved in this. So these men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Don't you realize that the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us?" He answered, "I merely did to them what they did to me." I merely did. I merely did. Did you say merely? You ruined their economy. You chopped up bodies. You murdered hundreds of men. None of those actions are adequately described by the use of the word merely. See what he's saying? We all do this. I'm the good guy in the story. Revenge and being hurt gives you this twisted sense of entitlement, of reality. They said to him, "We've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." Samson said, "Swear to me that you won't kill me by yourselves." They agreed. We'll tie you up, we'll hand you over to them, we'll not kill you. So the narrator says they bound him with 2 ropes and led him up from the rock. Then in the next verse we're told that as he approached Lehi, the Philistines came towards him shouting. And then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. By the way, the phrase Spirit of the Lord in the Hebrew Bible is a way of referring to an outlier, to someone who's extraordinarily talented in some way. So, for example, in the Bible, the craftsmen who built the temple are said to have done so with the Spirit of the Lord. The poets and musicians who wrote and composed the Psalms are said to have done so with the Spirit of the Lord. That's their talent. Samson's talent is for violence. He's one of those people who was born to be a soldier. That was his spiritual gift. And it was good. War, after all, is an art form, always has been. And Samson was good at his art. And so in verse 15, finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Then Samson said, "With a donkey's jawbone I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone I have killed 1,000 men." And then when he finished speaking, he threw away the bone, and the place was called Ramoth Lehi, which means Jawbone Hill. So there you go. That's the savage story. And beyond the barbarism and the weirdness, it's a story that resonates with the hurts and the wounds that we carry around. The idea of getting your own back is appealing. Revenge is sweet. So let's go ahead for a moment in church. It's not very Christian, but we'll have a pass. Let's entertain the thought for a moment. What sort of things could you do to hurt the person who hurt you? An eye for an eye. A tooth for a tooth. It's in the Bible. It's only right that you should do something to them. Something that says they hurt you and they didn't get away with it. But just before you run out and buy yourself a 12 gauge, here's my thoughts on revenge. Thought number 1. I think revenge makes things worse, not better. This story starts out with an ex-wife and a goat, and it ends in murder. This is how revenge is. It always makes things worse. And maybe the first step that you can take towards forgiveness is realizing the insanity of the alternative. Ask yourself the question, what would you have to do to them to take away the hurt and the pain of what they did to you? Seriously. At what point would their pain be therapeutic in your life? Do you think that if you make them feel bad, that will make you feel better? What would you have to do to undo what they did? And no sooner do you begin to ask those questions that you understand revenge just doesn't work. Forgiveness is really the only option. Here's another thought, quite a dark one. Maybe revenge is God's business, not ours. Writing to the church in Rome, the Apostle Paul said, "Do not repay evil for evil, but be careful to do what's right in the eyes of all." This is a big idea in the Bible. You should never allow someone else's destructive behavior to be the excuse for your own destructive behavior. Your behavior as a Christian is always to be influenced by your internal sense of right and wrong, and never by the external things that are being done to you and said about you. If you're a Christian, then the way other people treat you should have very little influence on the way you treat them. The Apostle Paul goes on to say, if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now, sometimes it's not possible. Some people are idiots and they're never going to change. They were toxic yesterday, they're toxic today, and you know what? They're going to be toxic tomorrow. And some of them are dangerous, and for your safety and for the safety of your family, you shouldn't be around those people. And that's all right. That's a separate issue. But nevertheless, make an effort, he says, to live at peace. Do not take revenge, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, "It is mine to avenge, and I will repay, says the Lord." I know that many of you, maybe all of you, have been hurt badly. You were robbed of a past that could have been better, should have been better. And one of the things that bothers you a lot is that the person who hurt you, they got away with it. They're getting on with their life, they're prospering, they're happy, and here you are living with the wounds of what they've done. They probably don't even know that it still bothers you. And when we take revenge, what we're saying is that apparently there is no God, and so it's up to me. I'll have to be the one who brings justice to that person, and I do it in my own petty little ways. I'll ignore them, I'll gossip about them, I'll give them the cold shoulder, I'll knife their business, and then they'll learn the lesson that what they did was wrong. And I'm sorry, but that's not the Christian way. The Christian way is for you to concentrate on your own good behavior and let God deal with their bad behavior. And the final thought, difficult thought about revenge, is that the antidote to it is to wish the person who wronged you well. Remember what Jesus said? You've heard that it was said, love your friends and hate your enemies, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who wrong you. To pray for a person, obviously, is to wish them well, to wish God's best for them, to want good things to come their way. So a question I would want to ask you is there any situation in your life where you just need to drop it? You know, you don't get on with that person and they don't get on with you and they hurt you and it's been going on for so long you don't even remember who started it and why it started. Maybe you just need to let it go. Drop it. Another question I would want to ask you is there any situation in your life where you just need to trust God a little more? I think getting through the fog of how you do this forgiveness thing, even though you've been hurt so much, and maybe it begins by just trusting that person to God, trusting what they did to God, understanding that them and their behavior, that's not your problem, that's God's problem. And your problem is how you experience forgiveness, how you experience freedom, how you experience release in your heart, how you experience letting go of yesterday. And the final difficult question I would want to ask you, is there anyone this morning who you need to wish well? It's difficult, but it's Christian. And you're Christian. And you've got this. Thank you for coming. God bless you. See you next Sunday.